Good morning once again, Crosswalk. It's lovely to be with you guys. We're always excited to be with this Crosswalk family in Jakarta.
And I second that. It really is a joyous day to be with you, joining me and Johnny here.
And as Kova said, I'm Johnny.
And I'm Kova. You probably might remember me from last week, the screen. If you don't remember him, he's the guy that usually comes up on stage.
Hopefully you remember me. I'm your pastor. Okay, so today we're looking at a really interesting story. What story are we looking at today?
We're looking at Caleb and Joshua, Johnny.
Caleb and Joshua, an amazing story, a story of faith, a story that spans several decades.
That's a long time.
It is a very long time. How many decades are you? How?
I refuse to answer that. That's a
two and something.
It's a sensitive question.
It's a sensitive question
with a sensitive answer.
Okay, so we've got Caleb who stems from the tribe of Judah, and Joshua who stems from the tribe of Ephraim. Now, these two young lads are part of the 12 spies that are sent to Canaan, the promised land. In Numbers chapter 13, God tells Moses, send forth spies into the land of Canaan, the land which I have given to you. We've discussed this topic about God giving this land. It's a land that he promised generations ago and that he continued to fulfill his promise. And so he tells them, send these spies into the land of Canaan. Each tribe send one representative. So we've got these two. At the time, by the way, Joshua's name was Hoshea. Later on, he had a change. We discussed that a few weeks ago. And so they go in and everybody goes, and Moses tells them, he commands them, look for what's in the land, look at the structure, look at the vegetation, look at the produce, the plants, the vegetables, look at the people that are there, look at the threats, look for any buildings, look for security, look for absolutely everything. I want you to examine the property, and if you find any good fruits, good produce, whatever the case may be, bring it back. This was intentional because at the time it was season for the first fruits, and so they brought the first fruit, grapes and what have you. It was all really, really juicy, really good fruits. Like when you go to the pasar, you go to the pasar and you find absolutely sweet fruits and veggies for a really good price as well. So,
basically what you're gonna cook for that day.
Basically, pretty much, yeah. But yeah, we're gonna look at a few verses. Numbers chapter 13, verse 25 to 30. And Kova, why don't you go ahead and read that for us?
At the end of the 40 days, they returned from spying out the land, and they came to Moses and Aaron and to all the congregation of the people of Israel in the wilderness of Paran, at Kadesh. They brought back word to them and to all the congregation and showed them the fruit of the land, and they told him, we came to the land to which you sent us. It flows with milk and honey, and this is its fruit. However, the people who dwell in the land are strong, and the cities are fortified and very large. And besides, we saw the descendants of Anak there. The Amalekites dwell in the land of Negeb. The Hittites, the Jebusites, and the Amorites dwell in the hill country. And the Canaanites dwell by the sea and along the Jordan. But Caleb quieted the people before Moses and said, let us go up at once and occupy it, for we are able to overcome it.
And so, Kova, while reading that, we encountered a lot of Hittites and Amalekites and a lot of difficult terminology, a lot of difficult names that the Old Testament is notorious for.
Really hard to pronounce, John.
But we noticed some very interesting character traits about Caleb. Why don't you tell us a bit about it?
See, one thing that I can say that I actually admire as well from Caleb is that it was since the very beginning that Caleb held on to the faith of what God has done for them. And usually as human beings, we tend to be very, very excited in the beginning of something, right? As a start, let's say, for example, we want to start a diet. We're usually only excited to start that within the first or 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And then that effort to keep going, it's a bit of a hassle. It's a battle, not only physically, but also mentally.
It just becomes an impossible task.
It becomes an impossible task. You said it right there. Now, one thing that I liked about Caleb is that his faith that he held on to, it wasn't only at the beginning. It was a continuous growth, a continuous improvement of the faith that he had in that beginning. So it might have been the level of his faith was probably par, maybe we can say. Now, holding on to that, even for a specific amount of time, is a difficult and a mental battle as well, with everything that goes on in your life, right? So, with that, not only did Caleb maintain that faith, but it actually grew exponentially when he, lived his life. With all the struggles, with all the battles, with all the challenges that he was faced, with every little nitty-gritty detail that God tested him with. He conquered that. And because of those battles, because of those tests that God gave, it's because of those that he grew. And God puts you in the foot of the battle so that you can basically grow continuously. He'll put you into war knowing that you have the strength of a soldier and conquer that battle, basically. That's one thing that I admire from Caleb.
It's honestly amazing.
Right.
We look at the life of Caleb and Joshua, and out of everyone who's there, Caleb and Joshua are the only ones who look past what is physically there and appreciate and acknowledge the greatness of God, right? We've got the other spies, they come back and they talk about the giants are there. So first they start off, look at these wonderful fruits. We got these pomegranates, these figs, these grapes, all these lovely, gracious fruits that even today we are absolutely in love with. But there are giants in this land. There are tribes in this land. Our enemies are in this land. They talk about the giants, the Nephilim. They say that when they try to stand next to these giants, they're compared to grasshoppers. And trying to fight a man when you look like a grasshopper is a really large feat. But Caleb and Joshua are aware of this promise. They're reminded of this promise that God has given them this land. And therefore, God will make all things possible. They've got this grounded faith. Everybody else didn't believe, and so as a result, they remained in the wilderness for several generations. But then comes a time, right? Comes a time that Caleb and Joshua rise once again, and all of Israel rise, and they are taken into the promised land, this land that God gave them generations ago. But because of their stubbornness, they remained in the wilderness for several years. And you touch on a very interesting fact that I really appreciate. Caleb, 45 years later, talks about this. Actually, let's read it. Joshua chapter 14, verse 9 to 12.
And Moses swore on that day, saying, surely the land on which your foot has trodden shall be an inheritance for you and your children forever, because you have wholly followed the Lord my God. And now, behold, the Lord has kept me alive, just as he said. These 45 years since the time that the Lord spoke this word to Moses while Israel walked in the wilderness, and now behold, I am this day 85 years old. I am still as strong as today as I was in the day that Moses sent me. My strength now is as my strength was then, for war and for going and coming. So now give me this hill country of which the Lord spoke on that day, for you heard on that day how the Anakim were there, with their great fortified cities. It may be that the Lord will be with me, and I shall drive them out, just as the Lord said.
Now, I noticed something very interesting there, He says something about his faith. So it was 45 years later, and right now he's 85 years old, which means that at the time he was 40 years old, right?
Right.
Quick maths. But it says something about his strength. What does it say about his strength?
It was basically the same strength, that same amount that he had back then.
Yeah.
It stayed the same, or either maybe you can somewhat quote unquote say it grew.
Yeah.
To a certain extent, right?
I like where you're going with that, because while we can look at it from a literal perspective where his strength was the same, which anybody who's exercised, anybody who's worked out knows how admirable that is, to be exactly the same strength at 85 that you were at 45. So while we can look at it at a literal point of view,
Correct.
I think he's talking more about a spiritual point of view, where he's talking about his faith, which has remained unwavered, because it wasn't a one-hit wonder kind of faith. It's a kind of faith that he worked on every single day. It was a kind of faith that grew character, that endured hardship, endured trials, endured depressions, endured frustrations. As a leader, he likely had great frustrations, but it was a kind of faith that despite all of that, because he remained grounded in God, he kept his pedal to the metal, and he just continued. He stayed consistent in that kind of faith.
And he kept those reps going, if we're speaking in a physical point of view. He kept those reps. He pushed out his 1 rep max, you can say, his 1 rep max. And even though at that very moment he must have felt fatigued,
Yeah.
he must have felt tired. I'm sure as the days went by, his strength grew.
Yeah.
His strength grew, his perseverance grew. Everything that he thought maybe was just at an average level, it grew exponentially.
One might say was hypertrophy-based faith.
I like what you're doing there.
Again, training terms. Now, I want to pose a question for all of you, and for now, Kova will answer, but I'd like you guys to answer for yourself. If you could spend a whole week with Caleb, what do you think you would learn? And Kova?
See, what he's experienced throughout that time span of 45 years, right? Having to maintain that level of consistency throughout that time. For me as an individual, again, I can speak from personal experience as well. Being consistent is easy. No, not easy. Is difficult.
Yeah.
Right. See, if you want to try to reach for something, if you have a goal that you have in mind, getting to that goal might be quote unquote manageable, might be quote unquote easy.
Yeah.
Right. The difficulty actually comes when you have to maintain it. When you have to maintain, when, speaking in physical terms, if you reached your body weight goal, right, you haven't conquered. But maintaining it, maintaining that body weight goal, maintaining your muscle mass, maintaining everything else, that becomes the challenge there. And that is one thing that I'd actually like to learn from Caleb, how he kept the consistency going, how he kept maintaining what needed to be maintained. And I hope that if he was still alive today, I'd be able to take that from him and spend some time with him at least.
Okay, there's a quality point. How can you be bold when you stand for your faith in Jesus? And one more to that. How can you as a person have the kind of faith, hypertrophy kind of faith, the kind of faith that's not just a one-hit wonder, but the kind of faith that grows?